Hello, football family. Welcome back into Huddle It Up Films. You can see by the title, Fantasy Football. Real Jake Vogel back with me. We're going to talk about the backbone of any fantasy team. And it's been that way, Jake, since as far back as I can remember. It's changed over the years, but if you don't have a good running back squad, it's tough to win any money. It's tough to finish in first place. Can you just speak on can you back me up on that? Go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, so until recently, running backs have been the most important position on a squad. Year after year, it's the first position going off the board, and I think that's going to remain a constant as long as teams really kind of move away from the bell cow running back. So there's only so many of them in the league. It is a position that you want to grab early and often so that you can have an edge over opponents.
Yeah, and I love stacking them in the flex spot too, just because of the touchdown percentages. Now, I didn't, maybe I raised my own question there, but I have to guess. I mean, you look at the stat sheets, it's the running backs, even the average ones are scoring 8 touchdowns, and you don't find that usually with your average receivers. So, yeah, things have changed a lot over the years. I mean, I can remember LaDainian Tomlinson, and if you drew the number one out of the hat, or if the computer came up number one, that guy was already celebrating because he knew he was going to be in every game because LaDainian was getting 25, 30 touches a game, all the touchdowns he could handle. So from that standpoint, things have changed. But the fewer of those, where it used to be get the good ones on the good teams, the fewer they become, the more valuable they become. And we'll flash your list up there on the screen. And I think your top 4 is like most consensus top 4s. You have McCaffrey, Cook, Henry, and Kamara. But I'm looking at that second group that you have, that tier 2. And there's some questions there. I'm actually glad that you have Aaron Jones in that list. I'm a big Aaron Jones fan because of the volume and the expected touchdowns he's going to get in the offense that I believe in with Aaron Rodgers, and also, of course, Vontae Adams and just the whole system they have set up there. But the one I'm going to challenge you on from the start, Saquon Barkley. If you guys watch the quarterback show, you know that I stay away from people with health issues. Barkley's status has been a little murky. So can you go to bat for Saquon Barkley right here and tell me why you have him so high?
I don't know if I should be the person going to bat for him, considering I drafted him last year before his injury. So that is tough. Anytime that you have a player and they are injured often, it is tough to put your trust back in that player. However, Saquon Barkley averaged 20.9 points per game in 2019. He was an absolute monster. That would put him third on the list out of all of the running backs. If he could do that same thing again, he would be number 3. And I think his health is bound to bounce back. It so happens that there are some players in league history that kind of have a weird injury history where they might miss a year and then the next year they play, kind of similar to what the Ravens just got in Jawan James. Saquon Barkley might be one of those guys where he comes back healthy this year, surprises people, and he provides you value if you get him a little bit later than that tier 1 of running backs that we just mentioned. I mean, he's a physical freak. There's a reason that he was drafted number 2 overall. If you believe it, if you believe in that philosophy of drafting running backs early, or you stay away from it completely when we're talking about the real NFL draft, you don't really have to worry about that as a fantasy owner. You're just trying to get the best players, and Barkley is one of those best players if he's healthy.
Yeah, and Barkley, the physical tools are obvious. And really, he's one of those players that I think is offense independent. I don't think that Saquon, if he's 100% healthy, he's going to be involved in the run game, the pass game, the goal line, just any part of the game, and he can make his points even on a bad team, so-so offense. And I mean, really, the Giants, if they're going to score points, they're going to need Saquon Barkley to be at his best. So I have no question on the player himself. And then when you were talking about players that have bounced back, believe it or not, Frank Gore, when he first started his career, was a injury risk. Well, I don't want to draft Frank Gore because he's always hurt.
Right.
And then look at the kind of career that he's had,
True.
the longevity. So yeah, injuries can be a predictor, but I mean, really, it's not out of the question for a player to come back just as strong, if not stronger. And certainly Giants fans and fantasy football fans, really NFL fans, unless you're a fan of the Eagles or the Washington football team or the Cowboys, are hoping for a full-blown Saquon Barkley. Another guy on your list you have there at number 8, Jonathan Taylor. Intriguing guy for me. If Carson Wentz was healthy, I might bump him up a little bit. But I'm not sure that I'm going to bump him down or knock him too much or fade him too much because of the quarterback situation. What are your thoughts on Jonathan Taylor?
Yeah, I think he's boosted by the situation. Of course, it helps an offense in general to have a more sure thing at quarterback. And Carson Wentz has had an up and down career to this point, especially down more recently. But having a kind of a backup, lower tier quarterback just means that they're going to rely more on the running backs. And Jonathan Taylor is a special running back. Of course, a pure runner, but he also showed some really soft hands last year, and I think he's going to be a key part of that passing game, especially when a backup quarterback is in there that maybe things are flying at him a little bit fast when he first gets in there. If it's Jacob Eason or someone else, he has the ability to check it down to Jonathan Taylor and Naheem Hines and to just get rid of that ball and take whatever positive yardage he can get. So I think Taylor is going to be a really, really solid back this year. Same with a guy that we'll touch on in a moment that you have pretty high.
Yeah, the Taylor argument, though, I have to stay on it for a minute because my head is telling me to drop him, even though my heart is saying leave him where he is. And it's because, well, I want to add to your point first before I counter your point, and that's that the defenses in that division aren't the best defenses. When you look at Tennessee, and you look at the Jags, and you look at the Texans, those are all teams going through a transition defensively. Tennessee has some upside there. Jacksonville has some upside there. But really, he's not in the toughest division as far as running backs. But the things that scare me about Taylor are, number one, without a quarterback, it's a lot of 8-man boxes. So that's going to put a lot of pressure on him. And then the fact that Naeem Hines has a role on this team, a specific designated role, really scares me as far as Taylor's upside as a receiving back. But I wanted to move on to somebody else, and I think this is a good time to mention that we made those lists. I asked Jake to make his list based on a half-point PPR league. So if you're in a standard league, take that into consideration. And if you're in a full-point PPR, take some of your pass catchers and move them up. And the guy you have right behind Taylor, we're going to take a look at your third tier right here, is Austin Ekeler. Obviously a killer in full-point PPRs, and even in half-point PPRs, he's going to be a starting running back RB1 you would expect.
Yeah, so Austin Ekeler is a really, especially in the passing game. We saw that before he took on the full starting role when Melvin Gordon was still with the Chargers. Last year he had some injuries to deal with, but a really young and up-and-coming quarterback in Justin Herbert. So this year I think he's going to hit the ground running, become a really key piece of that offense. There are two weapons in the wide receiver room with Keenan Allen, one of the best route runners in football, period, and Mike Williams as a deep ball specialist and a guy that really is making money when it comes to contested catch situations. So Ekeler is going to be, the guy that gets probably the second most touches in that group. I would put him ahead of Williams because of all the check down situations and his route running as a running back.
All great points. Also, I wanted to touch on somebody that I'm very high on, and that's our own Ravens' own J.K. Dobbins. Now, you have him at number 13 on your list, and I think that the rankings for J.K. are going to be varied. They're going to be all over the place, and it's for two reasons. One is the just immense talent that Dobbins has in leading the league last year at 6 yards per carry. But in the Ravens system, they're going to use Lamar. They're going to use Gus. Ingram's gone. So in my opinion, I think that he'll be close to that 200 carries. But the thing that I'm banking on for J.K. Dobbins is the touchdowns. It's why when I put out my list, I will probably have him somewhere around 6th, 7th, depending on how things go in this preseason, because I just, well, number one, really believe in J.K. Dobbins, the football player. And I think the volume will grow. I think that you'll see Gus in about the same role as he has been the last 2 years, and that Dobbins will pick up those Ingram carries.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very high on JK as well. My projections are a little bit lower than what Daniel Jeremiah recently put out there. He was kind of
aggressive.
Kind of aggressive, saying JK would be in that 1,400 yard story this year. And with an extra game, I could see that as a possibility. But I'd really kind of imagine that 1,200 rushing yards with maybe about 300 receiving yards tagged on. And he should be a high volume touchdown maker in this offense. So
yeah, that's what I'm banking on, Jake, is the touchdowns, because I didn't know how that was going to go last year, and quite frankly, when it comes to the Ravens film study, I don't care who's getting. I just, as long as they score. I mean, I'm sure fans can relate to that from any team, but the Ravens, if you're not a Ravens fan and you don't know, they leaned on J.K. He had a touchdown streak. If you look at his game log, I think it was like eight straight games, 9 straight games, something ridiculous like that, 9 out of 10 to finish the season. So J.K. on the goal line and in and around the goal line is going to be all that in a bag of chips. If you want an old man phrase out there you go. But yeah, Jake, if you could you please touch on a couple of other guys that you have here? Ezekiel Elliott. Now you have him at 18th on your list, which is low compared to where I've seen him. What scares you about Ezekiel Elliott and his situation down there in Dallas?
Yeah, so Ezekiel Elliott is a guy I do expect to bounce back. Last year he averaged 11.5 points per game. But I looked at the numbers a little bit closer, and he wasn't really improving his numbers that much. So I looked at the snap count, and if I multiplied his snap count out to 100% and got his output and matched it with him playing every single snap, he was only at 15.55 points per game versus that 7.5 at what he currently was during the season. So I do expect those numbers to move a little bit. I think he can be in that 15 range without playing all the snaps. But some of those players kind of top out for whatever reason, whereas other ones have a huge amount of room to grow. Like a guy we talked about earlier, Jonathan Taylor is one of those top guys. If he can a larger share of the carries and the touches, he would make many more points for you in fantasy. So Ezekiel is, in that middle tier for me. Definitely somebody to go after if you've missed on the first few guys. I do think that offensive line is improving and Dak should be back. So
yeah, I mean, all that good things said, you still have 17 running backs ahead of them. So it's important for people to realize, because they see the name and they'll see. I mean, I think Ezekiel Elliott is getting a lot of love out there in the community too. But Tony Pollard scares the heck out of me, just having him around. And, the whole Dallas situation with Dak throwing for a lot of yards. Hopefully they get their offense on track too. I have Ezekiel Elliott higher. It's just going to be a tough situation to judge there. Okay, so another guy we see here is at number 16, Mike Davis. Surprising name, I think, for some, but he is the number 1 running back, a clear-cut number 1 running back. Why do you have Mike Davis, and why do you have him ahead of a guy like Elliott, Clyde Edwards-Helaire?
Yeah, so Mike Davis is one of those guys that really showed out when Christian McCaffrey went down. So he was the number 2 running back in Carolina. Started out with a bang, has really nice receiving skills, not to the same level as a tier 1 guy McCaffrey, but he's going into a new offense this year, one that should be led by new head coach Arthur Smith, who was the game plan designer for the Tennessee Titans all of these recent years in Tennessee. So you have Derrick Henry year after year churning out big yards. I think Mike Davis will be a junior version of that, but still a bell cow version in that Atlanta offense. He's not going to be the same thing as Derrick Henry, but he should certainly be in the top 15 running backs when you're considering who's behind him on the depth chart, and how much Arthur Smith likes to run the ball.
Those are both great points, and I love the Arthur Smith addition for that team, just because for the running back, especially for the running backs, they're going to eat. Mike Davis is not as talented as Derrick Henry. Nobody's saying that. Jake made himself pretty clear. But if you're talking about volume, not much competition, and some history to build on, I like Mike Davis. He's a guy that's going to creep up draft boards. I have a feeling by the time most people draft, and I think you're ahead of the curve on that one. Now, one guy that intrigues me so much, and he probably helped win guys leagues last year, is James Robinson. Now, they go ahead down in Jacksonville and they draft Travis Etienne, who we spoke about a little bit on the quarterback show, who I expect will help Trevor Lawrence in the pass game. But rock solid, out of nowhere, every week starter, James Robinson. You have him at number 21 on this list. What are the chances that he'll be a little higher on this list as the preseason moves on?
I'm not sure how much more he is going to move up, but I do like him as well as Travis Etienne as running back options. So in a similar mold, but still different to what they have in Cleveland. Both running backs can be effective. When you're talking about Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, they are very solid contributors at the running back position, and having either of them, they can be starters for you. Robinson and Etienne are lower tier versions of those guys. Their games don't necessarily model the same way, but I could see a little bit of a comparison with Etienne being more of the receiving back potentially, and Robinson carrying that thunder at the goal line and being the steady. He's not much of a veteran considering he's like 21 years old, but being the elder statesman in that room.
He's built for it, man. He's built for that goal line for sure. And surprising skills as a receiver. I mean, just a surprising transition to the NFL all around. And something sticks out to me just looking at your second tier there is that we have 22 running backs listed. That's pretty deep. If you get Kareem Hunt, who you have last in that tier, as your RB2, I mean, that's not a liability. That's a spot that you can count on. So it's a deep group. I don't know. Obviously, you want to have the top guys if you can get them. But this seems like a position that you can kind of find a guy that you like who maybe others don't like and pick out your guy and get good value on them. Would you agree with that, Jake?
Absolutely. Yep, I definitely agree. There are decent running backs. They are going to fly off the boards many times when you can't help the run on those guys, but you'll still be able to get one or two. For
sure. Like Jake, if you have 22 running backs that you like in those tiers, I mean, you see it with any kind of draft, even the real NFL draft. If you're drafting 22nd, you're not getting your 22nd ranked guy.
Exactly.
You're usually getting your 15th ranked guy or something around there. So go ahead. Once running backs that you don't love fall off, I would suggest this year to just back up off the situation, fill your receivers, jump on that tight end, maybe get yourself a good quarterback, and then come back and double up on these running backs because you see how important they are. But we're going to move on to the third tier. There's a couple of guys who I could arguably put in that second tier that are right there. Let's start with Travis Etienne. We've bounced around him a bunch. You have him just a few slots below James Robinson. Mm-hmm. What do you like about Etienne, how he fits in this Jacksonville offense?
Drafted him in the first round for a reason. The guy has track speed. Speed kills. It kills defenses. It kills in general. he is going to be used as a weapon. You can view him as RB2 in this offense behind Robinson, maybe for total carries. He might not end up having the most carries, but he is going to be getting in multiple ways. He's going to receive it a lot from teammate Trevor Lawrence, and he's going to be used in the slot and perhaps even on some wide receiver screens, bubble screens, stuff like that. So it's a weapon, and Urban Meyer enjoys having players like that in his offense. So I would still draft him relatively high, and if you're in a dynasty league, draft him higher.
Yeah, a couple of things I want to back up there. The connection between him and Lawrence. I mean, there's, people think, well, it's a screen pass. How hard is it? Anybody can do that. But there is a feel to it, a timing to it. And that's something that I expect Lawrence and Etienne to have a feel for. And then with that early buzz of Etienne lining up at receiver, I mean, from a fantasy standpoint, you just have to love that. Maybe you're not enamored with it if you're a Jags fan because you drafted a guy in the first round and he doesn't have a true position. But from that kind of flexibility in a fantasy, from a fantasy standpoint, is great. And I think we could see a lot of situations in Jacksonville. At least if I was the coordinator down there, I try to find a way to get both of these guys on the field at the same time. Yep. Really mess up the defense's personnel groupings, not only the personnel groupings, but how they line up, and just change things. Another guy I wanted to go to. Really, this is a guy that has really puzzled me, especially after. I had a share of him last year and a share of him the year before, and that's Miles Sanders out of Philadelphia. If you have Jalen Hurts there and you run a lot of option, we've seen how that can take the pressure off of a running back. But Miles Sanders really fell below expectations last year when he had that chance. Absolutely,
yeah. He's somebody that's kind of hard to get a pulse on around the league. A lot of people don't like him very much. His points per game have been solid, just not what you expect. So last year he was at 15.7 points per game. And if he had all of the snaps, he would have been at 22.22 points per game, which is really solid. It's really solid. There's just something about him and about his game that doesn't quite translate. So they drafted a rookie that a lot of people really liked, Kenneth Gainwell. He's out of Memphis. Mm-hmm. Which is appealing because if our listeners know, Antonio Gibson also came out of Memphis, a guy that I did some scouting work on just for fun on the side, and I did some write-ups on players. Antonio Gibson was a guy that you could scout as a wide receiver or you could scout him as a running back. I preferred him as a running back, but I saw soft hand and solid run after catch ability and a little bit of route running. Kenneth Gainwell is an even better player in space in terms of route running, and just
he's got that juice too, Jake.
Yeah,
and
just the receiving game, running back. So he is going to get snaps early and often in Philadelphia with that offense. If Jalen Hurts enjoys dunking it down, he used to have a guy named Najee Harris, and I think he played with Josh Jacobs at one point, maybe. And some of those other Alabama running backs here and there. So he could surprise, definitely take Gainwell in dynasty drafts and
handcuff him. Yeah. I mean, you might want to handcuff him. Not that I'm not big on handcuffing a flex running back because what's the point? You can find somebody. But if you're talking about Miles Sanders, and you're depending on him as your RB2 or your every week flex, I wouldn't mind if there's not another handcuff to be had. Take Kenneth Gainwell. I mean, I think that guy has a lot of upside, and I love Miles Sanders coming out of college too. So I don't want to be down fall down on him, but he's just a tough player for me to judge. So I had to have you speak on him. Now we're getting into where it gets real tricky with the running backs in this area here. We put Jake's list back up on the screen. We have to talk about something that we might not be able to get a good read on in the preseason, and that is, what is the carry share? How are these carries going to be divvied up? And I wanted you to touch on two situations at once, if you could. One is the Cardinal the Kenyon Drake situation. Sorry for saying Cardinals. And then the other one is Melvin Gordon, Javonte Williams. What are they doing in Denver? what's going on with Kenyon Drake here. How's this all going to shake out?
Man, both of those are really tough situations for an outsider like me. I really like Javonte Williams. I liked him a ton coming into this draft. I think at some point during the season he could take over as the starter in Denver. So I would draft him in a moderate range in a redraft league. But Melvin Gordon might have the slight edge early on in terms of carries and touches. So Williams is definitely a future play. Kenyon Drake's situation being behind Josh Jacobs, I still think he'll get a decent share of the load. I feel like we're talking about Lord of the Rings here.
Yeah.
But Jacobs is clearly the better player at this point, and he will be the quote unquote bell cow in that backfield. But I would kind of put Drake at the number 4 player in terms of volume in that Raiders off Darren Waller and Josh Jacobs. Then you have a guy like Henry Ruggs, and then perhaps it's Kenyon Drake. So I do still like him as a player. And if you struggle to get running, use him as a flex option.
Yeah, Kenyon Drake is the reason that I have to bump Josh Jacobs down in my list because I love Josh Jacobs. I think John Gruden loves Josh Jacobs. He's proven he can do it on every situation, but he will play hurt, and he has been banged up. Not necessarily missing a ton of time, but Josh Jacobs has played through some injuries, and I think that was a power move by Mayock and Gruden to go out and get a steady player like Kenyon Drake. Now Kenyon Drake, not going to blow the world away with his speed. He's not going to put up huge numbers, but we saw how Arizona used him on the goal line. That's why I said Arizona earlier, his former team. They were not afraid to run Kenyon Drake into the pile on first down. Just a really good player. I think that his upside was had when it wasn't he with Miami earlier in his career.
Yes.
It kind of blew up there, and that's how he got his contract in Arizona. But I still think that he's a good player, and I think that he will cut in. And then when you talk about the Melvin Gordon, Javonte Williams situation, I have no clue. Melvin Gordon had a pretty darn good year under the radar. Disappointing for where people had drafted him, but then you look, it's one of those guys where you look at the end numbers and you're like, wait a minute. I thought he kind of stunk it up last year, but here he is. What do you have, like 10 touchdowns or something? His touchdowns were good. And like you said, maybe they lean on a steadier player, a veteran player, player that has a history of pass blocking over Javonte Williams. So I can't get a read on this situation. Now, one guy that you have number 30 on your list, that's the Patriots, Damien Harris. Now with James White and the plethora of games that they play in New England, who knows? It's a running back situation that you generally want to stay away from. But Damien Harris, man, he kind of snuck up on me last year. And when my final lists are completed, I feel like I'm going to have him higher than 30th, Jake. Like, is it just the Belichick running back guessing game that has you keeping him down a little bit on your list?
Yeah, so for me, it's more of the lack of value in the passing game. So I feel like he is the RB1 in New England, which is a good thing because they have a very strong offensive line. They proved that. And they have Cam Newton at the helm. We'll see what happens with that quarterback situation, which kind of makes it backfield and usage situation for all the running backs as well. But like a player in the similar mold to Gus Edwards in Baltimore, where he has a strong floor as a very good pure running back, and he's not going to offer a receiving game. Edwards, of course, developed a little bit in that area last year. We'll see what Harris can do during the 2021 season, but I'm not really sure how many guys above him on this list you could move out of the way for a guy like Damien Harris.
It's very fair. I would say, when I look at the Kenyon Drakes or what's going on in Denver, I'll probably have Harris ahead of them. But you're right; it's a pretty deep running back group overall. There's another guy on this list that I think I have to pick at you on. and that's Darrell Henderson. Now, you just went on, Jake. You just talked about these Memphis running backs. You just talked about Gainwell. I
Yeah.
mean, Darrell Henderson, no Cam Akers, the McVay offense. I think that I'm going to strongly disagree with you on this one, and I'll probably have Henderson somewhere in my top 25.
Okay. I could definitely see that being a case where I'm way wrong on it. I just haven't been super impressed with him and his ability to take the starting role in that Rams offense previously, and have another player that is a sleeper, Xavier Jones, who was an absolute stud at the collegiate level as well. He's on their team, and they just drafted Jake Funk, I believe, out of Maryland. So the backfield situation there could go in many different ways. Henderson seems to be the guy with that lead job currently. It's too cloudy for me to put any stock into it.
Okay, very fair. And then the other player, the last player, I promise, Jake, I'll let you go soon. But Michael Carter of the Jets, you mentioned you liked him in the draft. I think that he's going to get a lot of run out there for a bad offense, granted. But 39, there's another one where I'm going to be like, Jake, come on, man. Bump him up your board, bro. So what's your take on Michael Carter?
Yeah, I really like the player. I just am not 100% sure that he is the starter week one, and you're getting – those 17 games out of him at this point. He would be my RB1 if I was in charge of the Jets, but I don't know the inner makings of that team at this point. They have a couple other guys, Ty Johnson, and I'm blanking on the other one, but I think it's one of the P. Ryan guys.
Yes.
Yes.
I think it's LaMichael over there, yes.
So the backfield is a little crowded. I think Michael Carter is the most talented and the guy that should win the job. So I could very well see by the time the season's kicking off, he's way higher on my list. But as of right now, I don't know the situation well enough. So he's kind of above that bottom tier for me.
Now, Jake, I want to ask you a little bit philosophical question here as it relates to running backs, but maybe this is the whole draft. For me, entails every position. I like to lean on players that I have a good understanding for in my early picks. I call them safe picks, but that's kind of just saying they don't have high upside. Like I take upside players, but I like really safe picks when I first started picking. And then when we get around this range to where you're picking your RB4, 5, that's where I start swinging for the fences because I figure I'm going to be cutting these guys anyway and rotating. Do you think that's a fair way to attack it? Or would you take, like for instance, if you think Michael Carter and Nyheim Hines, say, are going to have equal situations? So, in other words, Michael Carter, Nyheim Hines, you like them about the same. Well, Michael Carter is a boom or bust, but Nyheim Hines is just going to get his 5 carries and 5 catches a game. Which way do you tend to swing, or is that a year-to-year thing for you?
So I think it depends on what I already drafted ahead of those guys. So like you're saying, if I'm drafting my RB4 at that point and my other guys are solid, I'd probably go for the higher upside player. So Michael Carter would be the answer for me because he could the lead dog in that running back room with the Jets, whereas Nance is not going to be that. He is going to be a really solid contributor in the passing game as long as the total volume doesn't shift towards Jonathan Taylor. They also have others in that backfield. So that situation is more diluted than what Michael Carter could step into with the Jets.
For sure. If something happened to Jonathan Taylor, I don't see them giving Nyheim Hines 15 straight carries a game. Nyheim Hines is going to be his own dog, and then somebody else is going to step into Taylor's spot. So I appreciate that philosophically. And again, when you're looking at these lists, you have to realize that we're going by a half PPR format. Philosophical, we just talked about what you've previously drafted affecting how you order these guys. So it's important really to stay flexible and know your league settings is the most important thing. Stay flexible and know your league settings.
Yeah, league settings are key in this. You have to know what this is before you draft.
Okay, and moving on. We're going to show Jake's last tier up there. These are running backs 40 to 54 on his list. You tell Jake does a complete job. Love Tony Pollard, number 40. I think he could easily slide up if Zeke's looking sluggish during this preseason, if Zeke plays at all, or if Tony Pollard blows up. I could see people moving him up his list. Love Latavius Murray, by the way. One of those guys that kind of has standalone value, but if something happened to Alvin Kamara, he's going to go way up the board. So I have a feeling, Jake, I'm going to end up with Latavius Murray on my team. And then Jamal Williams and Phillip Lindsay. So I'm looking at those first 4 guys here on your list. Jake, it seems like they all have some kind of value by themselves and could have bigger value if they earn a larger share of the carries.
Absolutely right with that. Any of them could become starters in that offense. I would look especially at Phillip Lindsay, number 43. Now, the Texans are his new team, and that is a tough organization to go into right now. But David Johnson has been slowing down. His career took off in year 2, I believe, and it has just taken a nosedive ever since then. So Lindsay has been a pretty consistent player throughout his career thus far, a couple 1,000-yard seasons, and just hasn't done enough to be like, this franchise running back position. So I could see him taking over a role, and obviously being in that bottom tier, he could catapult himself much higher if that ends up his situation and the offense is adequate at best.
Yeah, and Jamal Williams at 42, Jake, he's another guy that I could see. He makes me think twice on Swift, because I love Swift a lot, but Jamal Williams has produced anytime he's been in there for Green Bay. So him coming to Detroit, a division rival, a veteran, he knows the NFC North well. So I really like those backs right there at 40 to 43. Just another indication of how deep this is. And then Jake, number 44, one of the more intriguing guys to me on this list, Trey Sermon, not a toolsy, like from my evaluator standpoint. He's not real fast. He's not real this. He's not got to juke somebody out of his shoes, but he's just really super productive, finds a way to fall forward. I could see him being a third down back and a guy that Shanahan could really count on here. Give me your thoughts on Trey.
Yeah, so Trey Sermon is a really exciting running back that brings a ton of thunder, a ton of power to his game, which is really refreshing in 2021. There's a couple guys that we'll get to later just down the list that do the same thing. But in a redraft, he's going to go lower. But in a dynasty league, this guy is going to surprise you with how early he can be picked, because the 49ers have in Trey Lance what that running quarterback can do for an offense and for those running backs like we've seen in Baltimore.
Oh, absolutely. Well said. We spoke on Xavier Jones, but I'm guessing that the other guy you're talking about is number 46 on your list, and that's A.J. Dillon, who came on strong, showed some flashes. I mean, the man's a beast and a physical runner. What do you expect? Like, let's just paint a scenario. Something happens to Aaron Jones. Let's just say, for the sake of Aaron Jones, it's only a couple of weeks. But A.J. Dillon comes in. He's got favorable average matchups, not really favorable, not really hard. Do you expect him to have a Aaron Jones type role as far as the volume there?
So A.J. Dillon is an impressive player, especially running the ball downhill. I don't expect his volume to be the same in the passing game. I think he can grow in that area, and he probably has since being in the league last year. But I just don't see it the same way as I see a guy like Aaron Jones or a guy we mentioned earlier that was with the Packers, Jamal Williams, as far as being a true pass catcher in today's offense. So Dillon would bring something different to that Packers offense. It would be really to see that punishing style that Dillon can bring. But I don't expect it to be the same thing if Jones is out for any period of time.
Now, one guy I have to bring up, next to last guy on your list, Chiba Hubbard. Now, you talk about a favorable situation. You know how much Carolina likes to run their offense through Christian McCaffrey. They have a new quarterback this year in Sam Darnold. But Chiba Hubbard, I'm guessing, Jake, you're going to tell me that if I draw the number one pick and draft Christian McCaffrey, that I got to make sure I get Chiba Hubbard somewhere in this draft and don't miss out on him.
Yeah, you definitely want to handcuff him if you take McCaffrey early. Just make sure you get Hubbard at some point later in the draft because injuries happen. Last year, McCaffrey, and if you had him, he didn't do much for you. And Mike Davis surely did. Hubbard is a more talented player at this point of his career than Mike Davis. He is not as veteran, not as savvy, but as a pure athletic skilled player, Hubbard is definitely an exciting one on the field, and he will produce for your fantasy team after he is out for any period of time.
Yeah, I thought he was underrated in this draft, honestly. Now, I did see some concerns with his vision. Not that he doesn't have 20/20 vision, but his running back vision, and would that be able to translate? I can't speak on that too much. I can only go off the games that I watched at Chiba Hubbard. But one thing you're not going to question is his speed. And if he gets out in the open field, McCaffrey is sneaky fast, but he's also got those power cuts in McCaffrey's game. Like, he'll run right over your shoulder, Jake. Like, not a juke, but not a run over you. It's just that, like, slasher. And I see a lot of slasher plus track star in Chiba Hubbard. So definitely have to draft him if you have McCaffrey. And then is there anybody else there in this tier at the end of the draft? I'm in one league, Jake, where there are 12 teams and we each draft 20 players. So, it's 240 players of torture when it was a live draft. Thankfully, now it's online. Anybody else you want to talk to? Is there any talk about anybody else that you would reach for to grab in this draft if you have an extra spot?
Yeah, I'll touch on one, not necessarily to grab because the situation is a little here, but that Chargers backfield. Last year we saw it with Austin Ekeler being out at times. Justin Jackson versus Joshua Kelly. It seems the consensus is Kelly as RB2 right now over Jackson. However, I kind of saw Jackson as being the more productive player during last season, where Kelly was just not averaging many yards per carry. That was a result of such a terrible offensive line or what. But that backfield is to keep an eye out for. Just see what happens in that situation. They also drafted a player, Roundtree, this year. So one of those guys likely doesn't make the roster.
I had a share of that Chargers backfield. I had the waiver position, and I went ahead and picked up. I had both of them at different times, just saying, okay, well, he's going to get 15 carries. They're playing this sorry team this week, and it was just underwhelming, man. It was just underwhelming. Like,
definitely was.
Like, I don't want Justin Jackson or Joshua Kelly this year, just because I feel like last year there were games where everything was lined up in their favor, and they let your boy down over here, bro. They let your boy down. So I'm staying away from that aspect. I'd probably be like a James Conner guy. Just, hey, they paid him, they brought him over here. It could be a high-flying offense. Maybe Conner's the guy that I take a flyer on in that group, or maybe even Chiba Hubbard on standalone value. As crazy as that sounds,
sure,
because they love to use McCaffrey, and I think that now that they paid him, they realized, and after he was hurt, maybe we can't run this guy into the ground. So, just to close, any final thoughts on any of the running backs? Philosophical. Anything that you have for us, can you please just give me your closing, give me your wisdom on one of the most important positions in fantasy football?
Sure. I would not sleep on Chris Carson. It's not really a thing. He just seems to be a guy that is productive in that Seattle offense. I do believe the offensive coordinator is going to let Russ cook this year. But I would still say Chris Carson is a valuable running back, and he averaged 15.65 points per game last year, and he's one of the most efficient backs. So if we gave him a snap count of 100%, he would be above 30 points per game in a PPR format, which is one of the highest marks, period, of all of the running backs. So it's very valuable, and you can get him at a discount price. So I would recommend, let your friends, buy Joe Mixon. He's had health issues. Let your friends buy Zeke, or I know you love Zeke, but just some of those other guys that are in a similar territory, and attack those steals that you can get, where a guy maybe just isn't as valued for whatever reason, and follow the math, follow the previous statistics, and where you foresee their game being in 2021.
It's very well said. And Carson was a guy that really did well for me in 2019. And then I think it was the fumble issues that he had, and where he was almost lost his job, but they kept coming back to Chris Carson. And Russ does have the ingredients to cook, no doubt about it. But aside from one Super Bowl, memorable Super Bowl incident, Pete Carroll is not afraid to give his running back the ball on the goal line. I guess unless it's Marshawn Lynch in the Super Bowl and you only need a yard. But sorry out there for Seahawks fans, any Seahawks fans that are watching. But yeah, Chris Carson was steady as heck for me. I had him in 2 leagues in 2019. Was very, very happy with him. So yeah, good pick. Sneaky pick. Like you said, hey, maybe you let some of those other high-priced guys go and pick yourself up a Chris Carson, get an extra receiver in the process or an extra back in the process, and come out on top. But anyway, Jake, I really wanted to thank you once again. Can't wait to do the wide receivers. Got wide receivers, tight ends, some defense coming up, and we're going to cover it all for you right here on Huddle It Up Films. Jake, thank you once again, my friend.
Thanks, Jason.